I would like now to introduce today's presenter. Manu Agarwal is a partner in Everest Group's business process services practice. He is responsible for the growth of the practice in terms of client relationship management, delivery excellence, and content innovation. Katrina Menzigian, Vice President, leads the firm's Analyst Relations program. In her current role, Katrina is responsible for building value-driven and mutually impactful relationships with analyst relations contacts at service and tech provider organizations in the marketplace. Abhishek Singh, partner, leads the cloud transformation research for Everest Group. As a partner with the firm, Abhishek is responsible for growth, client relationships, and thought leadership in North America. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Katrina.
Thank you, Rafaela. Hello and welcome, everybody. And we're very excited to be able to share our session with you today. This is the first webinar Everest Group is conducting in 2023. And we decided to target the analyst relations community with our message for the year. So, it gives us a chance to get the year off to hopefully a quick start and have everybody have information that's useful to them as they go through the first months of the year. The focus of today's discussion is twofold. In the first part, we are going to share with you some of the key findings that were shared during a very large webinar we held on December 13th. That was looking at the 5 themes for 2023 that our firm has honed in on based on our body of work. And so we'll give you the highlights from that, although we'll be referring to it throughout the session today. And we do provide you with the link so you could go and spend time diving more deeply into that particular session. So wanted to share that information with you. But the other point we're really focused on today is how do we take the learnings from that webinar and empower analyst relations professionals to bring that insight to what they do with their internal and external stakeholders in the marketplace? How do we look at that information from the point of view of an analyst relations professional and help you drive value to your different stakeholders in the organization? So, we're happy to be able to help you in furthering that mission that is part of your role. So let's begin. If we could go on to the themes for today, the discussion points for today. We do start off with a welcome from Peter Bender-Samuel, our CEO, but then we'll move from that into giving you a little bit of a context as how we see it here at Everest Group about what's going on in the world and in the market, to provide you with some data coming out of our financial research team. And then we'll spend some time talking about those key themes that I referred to and how they're relevant to your space. And then lastly, providing you with some actionable, tangible steps that would allow you to be that conduit that bridges the outside world with your inside organization, and hopefully give you ideas that will spark actionable things that can help you move your agenda forward. And then lastly, we'll spend some time on Q&A and take your questions. We've received some really good questions ahead of time in the registration phase, but we are fielding questions that are coming in through the discussion as well. So with that, let's begin.
I want to take a moment to thank you for investing the time to get to know our company, to get to know our offerings, and to get to know our analysts. Thank you for helping us identify the issues your executives are wrestling with so we can apply our research and help them make better decisions. I look forward to deepening our friendship and partnership in the coming year.
Thank you from Peter. I know I speak to Peter quite often about our relationships with analyst relations folks, and he's very interested in making sure that along with all of the practitioners and clients of our research in the enterprise space, that we have a focus on working closely with analyst relations folks, and he's always asking me about different individuals and different relationships and thinking about, how do we make sure that we're engaged properly. So he was very excited for the opportunity to send a message in your direction. With that, as I said, we're going to provide you with some context of how Everest Group sees what's happening in the marketplace. And so that portion of our conversation will be led by Manu. So over to you, Manu.
Thanks, Katrina. So I want to start with obviously the theme around the macroeconomics, right? I'm guessing not a day goes by in this year as well as for the better part of last year where we haven't really talked about the looming concerns around recession. So let me start there, right? So clearly, if you look at any of the financial indicators in the industry, right, whether it's about the consumer prices, the bond yields, the interest rates, the probability of recession, all of those indicators do indicate that a recession is kind of imminent. And we're already starting to see that, okay, in countries like UK and all, this is starting to play out. And I'm going to sound like a broken horn, but I do want to talk about why this recession is different. So even if there is a recession, look at some of the positive sentiments around the industry. We're still looking at very strong labor markets. We still haven't seen that going down. We still see a lot of growth momentum. We still see a lot of disposable income. So in many ways, what is basically happening is almost like an aftermath of 2-3 years of stimulus payments and COVID impacts, etc., which is starting to play out. And because we have gone through this period where for the last 2-3 years, none of the economic models, none of the financial models could predict, one would argue that even today, it's somewhat hard to predict, is this a real recession or is this just us correcting the course from the last 2 or 3 years? So what that means for now, our industry is that while yes, there is potentially a recession, there are talks around financial indicators turning bad, but there are a lot of positive signs in the industry which are continuing to drive growth. But at the same time, I don't want to put out the message that everything is rosy. There are clients who are going to be concerned about what does this mean for their business. And that's where you see some bit of a hesitation in the industry. There are going to be clients who want a little bit of that extra comfort before they take some of those big decisions in terms of how do they want to work with you, work with your businesses. So, and it's our job as an industry to make sure that we elevate some of those concerns in the client's mind and help them make those right decisions. So the message I want to kind of put out there is, while there are a lot of signs of concerns around a looming recession, there are a lot of positive signs, and it's just a matter of time before the industry starts setting down on that uncertainty and they start taking decisions that they will advance their cause. And we'll talk about later in the conversation what those decisions could look like. Where do we see some of those key themes for 2023 that will really drive growth and boost the overall industry?
So Manu, can you kind of set the context by asking that question? Is this a real recession? And when our financial research team showed me this slide, my initial reaction was, wow, what's really happening here? Because if you look at this chart, which kind of tries to bring out some sort of correlation between how GDP growth and IT BPS spend kind of correlate together, what you see is that for a greater part of the history, since we've been tracking this since the first quarter of 2017, there has largely been a strong correlation between GDP growth and ITS and BPS spending. But towards the latter half of 2021, we have seen a sort of disconnect appearing here. And that makes us think about what's really happening. And then we need to investigate this further. And we have a few set of hypotheses around why this disconnect appears, because IT and business process service spending seems to be going in a different direction, which is really positive. And for this group, obviously, you will take heart from the fact that, hey, indeed, there is growth in the industry in comparison to the dichotomy that we are witnessing that, hey, GDP growth is indeed becoming very sluggish. And it's not that IT and BP spend is totally uncorrelated with what is happening at a macro level. That would be kind of a fool's world to imagine something like that happening. Eventually, we intend to see some impact of it. But when we started to investigate this disconnect, there were a few things that came out very clearly from our channel checks, etc. One was primarily what happened during the pandemic was tech becoming kind of the new redeemer for the industry in terms of establishing alternative channel to run businesses, whether it was healthcare trying to go the route of telehealth. Banking obviously had moved to digital channels long back, but they scaled those options. And pick any industry, they had to start relying on tech as brick and mortar offices, people coming into real estate, etc., started falling off the cliff. So that became one aspect of why tech suddenly became kind of core to how different industries started to look at it, rather than a support function which was helping things make things better. So that was one. Second thing is, if you look at themes such as cloud, data, customer experience, these aspects, which are kind of tech, as well as now becoming kind of core to industries to be looking at as they scale in different geos, new channels, etc. These are kind of basic technology areas wherein clients will continue to spend, and there are pre-committed spend initiatives that are already panning out, and that is what is reflecting in the spend that we are witnessing in the last few quarters. And last but not the least, another thing that came out of these channel checks was the fact that a lot of organizations are now communicating to the street regarding their purpose-driven goals. So whether we are talking about ESG, or we are talking about broader sustainability and diversity goals, etc. One thing, when we start to peel the onion, what's is visible is that a lot of these purpose-driven goals, technology is actually the low-hanging fruit of it. So if you're talking about reducing carbon footprint, guess where most of the spend goes? It starts off by looking at your own data centers, the power consumption that you're doing, how you are actually tracking it, how you're using data to report effectively to the regulators, etc. Europe has been a shining light in somewhat regulating or mandating for that to happen. And even in US, because of new SEC requirements that are starting to happen. So these three aspects is what we believe from our early analysis is creating that disconnect. But the jury is still out. The recession is still likely to play out in its full force in the year. I don't have a crystal ball to say which direction it will go, but so far, as you can see, the picture looks quite good.
Great. Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you, Manu. So many questions come to mind. And I'm actually going to ask our audience a question. So as you think of 2023 and you think of your firm's conversations, and I see people are already plugging in answers, wonderful. Where's your anticipated direction of business growth in the market? Now, as folks are filling this in, let me ask you a question, Abhishek, that came to mind. So you described a scenario, and I think we've all heard this, where 2021, 22 reflected growth that was driven first by immediate sort of need because of changing dynamics, and then pent-up demand. We could say 22 is more, there was a wave of pent-up demand that came through. Sort of, what's your sense of where people are? Are they catching their breath and digesting all of this investment now? Are they trying to get the most value out of their investments that they've made? Where do we stand in terms of that thought process?
I think you kind of answered that question when you talked about the value realization aspect. Is when I started describing that disconnect, one of the things that I had mentioned was that tech has become the new redeemer, and plus there are pre-committed initiatives that enterprises have already embarked upon. Now, the questions that we are seeing pop up most often for us in the last 6 months or so have largely been around, hey, we have started a few things, but we need to showcase outcomes out of it, because our CFOs, I mean, I'm quoting enterprise CIOs, etc., who are saying that, hey, our CFOs are asking us this question as regards which are the initiatives who have actually yielded the results that which we identified when we embarked on these initiatives. So there will be increased scrutiny on the investments being made, rather than, hey, people saying that, hey, we don't want to do anything right now. So I think that's the nuance here. And that's why value realization is going to be an important aspect of the narrative that I expect most organizations who supply services or products in this space will have to continually message around it.
Yeah, so it's about thoughtfully proceeding as opposed to having urgency because of uncertainty in operations or something like that.
Are we ready to show the results?
Yeah, we are. I think they're up. And so, I think what you just said ties in with our results. We're not seeing anybody who's really very pessimistic. There's some skepticism and some neutral, but, it seems as though our audience, and I'm assuming our audience is a reflection of their organizations, tend to be either somewhat or highly optimistic. So that correlates with some of the points Manu was making about an environment where it's sort of wait and see. Let's plan for the future. We think we're heading in a positive direction, but let's not be too gung-ho about where this is headed. So
pretty much in line with what we are seeing on our enterprise side channel checks also. So it's
okay,
quite heartening to hear. Yeah.
Okay, very good, very good. All right. So moving forward, wanted to begin sharing with you some of what we have found in our own research as well. I'm going to close this window. All right. So one of the things that we do is that we conduct a survey in October and November of 2022. We called it our 2023 Key Issue Study. We reached out to 200 respondents. About 150 of them are Fortune 2000 enterprises, and 50 of them are providers of either IT nature or services nature. And we try to gauge what are their priorities and their concerns for 2023. We specifically asked a question about their expected change to global services budgets. And by global services, we're referring to their spending on outsourcing, shared services, in-house centers, captives, GBS, however your organization and your clients term it, and the budget plan for those operations in the coming year. And as you can see from the results here that are on the left-hand side of your page, again, this reflects what we just saw in our own survey or our own poll, that, people are expecting a decent amount of either stability or moderate to, in some cases, significant growth in spending. And this is related to, I think, the fact that that we've outlined here on the right-hand side of the page. What's driving this optimism? One is that cost pressures persist, and it's cost pressures related to not only managing ongoing operational cost, but it's also cost pressure that creates the flexibility to have assets that will allow for investment. So trying to move forward cost effectively in making investments for growth. In line with that is this recurring theme, and you'll hear about it more in our comments going forward, around continued investment in digital, but we're at a phase where the practical side of digital is taking a little bit of more precedence over the aspirational side. And so we'll explore that in more depth in a few moments. The resiliency of these service delivery models, is also another factor that's creating continued investment. So feeling confident in the value that's driven by outsourcing models and relationships, feeling confident that your between balancing your shared services and your outsourcing and your other in your in-house centers, you're getting the kind of results that you're looking for, and it creates value in how you manage the business. These are also reinforcing the concepts here. And then lastly, talent shortages. We'll talk about that a little bit as well in more depth, but the talent shortage itself takes many different forms and in different geographies and with different levels of skill sets. And so having the flexibility to tackle those in a more targeted way using different kinds of delivery models is also another confirmed value proposition from the world of global services. So that is the overall context. We've shared with you what we're seeing as analysts that track the market. We've shared with you what we're seeing in our conversations with enterprises and the buyers in the marketplace. So let's dive deeply into the whole key theme space that we see happening as relevant for 2023. Abhishek, you're on mute right now.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
Yeah. So thank you, Katrina, for setting the context. In fact, when I was putting together this slide, there were 5 themes, and I was thinking, hey, should I put animation, go one by one, or should I just put all of them together? And I realized that all of these themes are so interconnected, makes sense to kind of look at them in totality. And that's why we have structured it this way. But I'll still go through each of them one by one. So starting off with the talent demand supply mismatch. It's not a new topic by any stretch of imagination. It has existed as an issue for last 2 years. It was more amplified, I would say, till mid of 2021. And since then, we have started to see things taper off. And I'm pretty sure the audience here would have picked up news around layoffs starting to happen in the tech industry, etc. And hence might even have a question as regards, hey, does a talent demand supply gap still exist in an environment wherein we are seeing some of those sobering messages starting to come out? The answer is still a very resounding yes. On the enterprise side, as we are observing for some of the key initiatives, whether they relate to customer experience, whether they relate to implementing cloud technologies, broader transformation, and some of the pre-committed initiatives aspect that I was talking about, from a supply side perspective, even to develop products, launching new versions of it. And both enterprises and our channel checks on the product side also indicate that there is a demand supply gap that still continues to exist in terms of availability of the right kind of talent. I mean, yeah, there are maybe the job openings have gone down, but still for the ones open, when we track them, we still see them open for 6-7 months. So that fulfillment aspect is still hard to come by, and that is impacting the speed with which organizations would want to get to the outcomes that they intend to get to. So I don't know, Manu, if you have any alternate perspectives or something that you want to add to it, but I don't see this mismatch going away anytime soon, even though we are in a recessionary phase, so to speak.
Yeah, and I absolutely second that, Abhishek. I think the entire mismatch has originated from the fact that in the end industry, in the end demand aspect, right? We still have a huge demand coming up. And then realize a lot of our supply side disruptions are still not done, right? We still have issues around supply chain. We have this geopolitical climate, which continues to get more and more tense. So when that happens, there is a huge supply that used to be in the industry, and that is now starting to go away. Plus, a lot more countries are also starting to say that, hey, how do we make sure that we have dependency in the right locations, in the right partners, have our right disaster recovery plans, the BCP plans, all of that. And all that it means is that, okay, we need more and more diversified set of talent. So it's not about saying that, hey, I just want an extra million people who can just do my bare bones data entry kind of stuff. But for the right kind of talent, as you mentioned, there is always a demand, and there's increasing demands towards diversification. So we don't really see this demand supply gap getting reversed. Yes, it isn't as big as what it was maybe during the pandemic, but definitely that mismatch still continues. And that's actually one of the big reasons why I mentioned earlier that this recession is actually different. As long as this mismatch continues, we don't see a slowdown necessarily happening in the industry.
Absolutely. In fact, the supply side disruption point that you mentioned is actually takes me to the point number 2, because costs have significantly gone up for both service providers and product players. And whether it's a Salesforce, an AWS, or it's an IBM or an Accenture, and the likes of those firms, as they see their cost base increasing, the time has come. In fact, we are at the hump, the inflection point, wherein rate card and pricing model renegotiation have become almost like imminent. They have to start to happen. Otherwise, the supply side disruption that we are witnessing, the cost increases that we have witnessed on the talent side, need to translate or start translating into it, whether it's licensing costs for product players or how some of the new pricing models are being redesigned, etc., so that there is some sort of rationalization and cost passing through on to enterprises. And now which becomes a huge debate point in itself, because we are in an environment wherein cost pressures are increasing for the buy side. Plus, at the same time, the supply side had witnessed kind of exponential increase in their cost from a talent perspective in the last 2 years. And those two kind of trends are conflicting with each other, but we expect somewhere some sort of a middle ground to come. I don't know what you are seeing in your conversations, Manu, on the IT side or the tech side of the things is what this is visible. I'm pretty sure on the process and operation side, it's as palpable as any.
And it is. I think when we think of price renegotiation, right, more often than not, mine goes towards enterprises wanting to negotiate prices down. Right. This is one of those topsy-turvy situations where actually the reverse is very much true. We've seen providers renegotiating prices to get them up because that's what the entire supply side environment demands. If you're giving out wage increases and you're trying to match inflation across a lot of these geographies where the recession is at an all-time high, yeah, you will have to get that kind of baked into your contracts as well. But yeah, to Abhishek's point, it's foolish to think of that entering into a conversation with an enterprise. I'm going to say, hey, I have a 10% COLA adjustment in India or in Philippines, and hence I need this kind of a price increase. We need to have that mindset. Okay, hey, how can I still create more value for both of us? And that's where it's not just about rate cards, it's about the pricing models. So are you willing to put more skin in the game? Are you willing to deliver more value for the kind of extra prices that you're charging? And as soon as you open up that conversation, yes, the openness towards price renegotiation goes up. Plus, also you all get to elevate your profile as a provider in front of your clients. So both those things are happening at the same time. So in many ways, this is actually a very good time to be in this industry and think about how do you want to restructure your pricing models.
Absolutely. And let's start doing that by addressing the buy side of the question, which is around, hey, if as an enterprise, as a bank, as a healthcare organization, or as an automobile company, I'm looking at rationalizing my costs in a year which is likely to be recessionary. One of the things from a tech perspective that the organizations are starting to look at is looking at their technology and services portfolio. Because in the last 2-3 years, because of so many initiatives that were kicked off the ground, there was almost a philosophy of let 1,000 flowers bloom. But right now, that is what is leading to organizations starting to think about rebalancing some of that portfolio. So the technology bloat, I won't call it bloat in the sense that we have used the term in past decades as regards, hey, there is redundancy in technology that has been solved for. But in many ways, some of the digital transformation initiatives, new products, API-led investments that have happened, time has come for organizations to think of their own platform stories and which are the most important components, whether it's from a services or a product perspective, that really make sense from that platform story perspective. So whether it's an insurance company thinking of its end-to-end services, or it's an automobile company thinking about, hey, if we are going into auto-driven cars, etc., how do we start thinking about the core platform on which it is going to be built? What are the composable components that really matter to us amongst the many that we have started to engage with? So that's where there is a significant rebalancing that we expect to happen during the year. And that is where most of the focus on cost rebalancing would be, is what our initial hypothesis is, which still should allow service providers and product players to continue having discussions around some of the rate increases, which was the last point that we were discussing. So as long as these two trends, cost rationalization on the enterprise side and the price handover or drive down from the supply perspective, do not conflict with each other, we see that as a win-win for both. What do you say, Manu?
Yeah, and Abhishek, I think that's a fair point, right? And this is also the place where there is an opportunity for service providers, technology providers to elevate into that strategic partner role, right? So when we get into discussions these days, right? In fact, I'm walking into one right after this, where even for billion-dollar deals, the clients are no longer saying, hey, invite 20, 30 service providers. They're saying, hey, give me a select list of 5, and hopefully I will eventually just give it out to 1 or 2 or 3 guys. Because the appetite towards spreading yourself too thin across 20 different providers is not there. You want one guy who can really do the job well, as opposed to having 30 guys competing against each other. So I think the enterprise have also realized that, okay, having more strategic partners gives them more leeway, gives them more flexibility to do the transformation, to the operational efficiency, all of that stuff, as opposed to just trying to do the bottom of the barrel rate card discussions. So we're starting to see a lot more of that strategic partner mindset kind of coming in the minds of enterprises, which is driving a lot of this. And the other thing to also think of is a lot of the game these days is not just about service provider one versus service provider two. It's about the ecosystem one versus the ecosystem two. So if I am a provider who's operating and I have a bunch of partners around me, a lot of times my clients will look at not just me, but the ecosystem that I play in. What kind of cloud services do I have? What kind of platforms do I partner with? What kind of systems do I operate in? That ecosystem becomes important. So equally important as your capabilities, also the partners that you bring on board. So that is where this rebalancing is going to happen, because enterprises are thinking that, hey, this is my stack, this is my ecosystem. Who do I see as a right fit provider to that? As opposed to saying, hey, let's just spread it thin, invite everyone and see what sticks on the wall.
Absolutely. That ecosystem point cannot be overstated. I mean, this is becoming the new, I would say, the established philosophy in the industry when it comes to when you look at your existing technology investments, you have to make a choice about, hey, the architecture that you chose, the technology platform that you started to engage with amongst the many, which is the one wherein you want to expand on. So we have seen situations wherein whether, and I'm taking names here just as example, not to favor anyone over the other, but hey, we have been doing ITSM with ServiceNow, and hence we would like to extend into other workflows that would help enhance our automation philosophy on ServiceNow. So that's one example. In case of cloud, in certain cases, whether it's a Microsoft Azure versus an AWS, most organizations are looking at the ecosystem of players, even when they are looking at their industry specific use cases, whether it's healthcare or banking, to try to expand on that platform itself. So that becomes a key aspect of how they want to move forward further on it. So that brings me to the point, which is point number 4, which is around, hey, if there has to be an ecosystem-led play and the clients will be thinking of rebalancing, they will be thinking of a portfolio which not only talks about, hey, how do we deal with 2023, but are we de-risked from a technology architecture or a services architecture from a 4 to 5 year time frame? What will be the key differentiators on which we'll be making those selection initiatives or decisions, rather? The point here is that what in our conversations, what's coming out, that productivity, and from a time to value perspective, how soon can they start seeing some of those results around productivity and even costs? Like, hey, not cost from the perspective of just, hey, it's billing rates or licensing costs, but overall from an operational perspective, how you're looking at cost rationalization through the usage of technology, automation, data, decision-making, etc., is playing out. So there are two lenses here. One is productivity. You're showcasing something which is an upside for an organization. While at looking at the base, you're talking about taking costs down for running some of the existing operations for which the baseline would have been X, and you intend to bring it down to 0.95X or a 0.9X, which is fairly good in this environment.
Yeah, I think Abhishek, the key of the game here is basically total cost of ownership. So, and this is not something that goes down easy, right? And I think for this group here, right, for the AR professionals as well, I think it's important to realize that a lot of your businesses need to understand the value behind it. When enterprises think of any kind of sourcing initiatives, they always think of total cost, right? It's not just about the salaries, it's the overheads, it's the technology costs, it's the transition costs, it's my project management. So there's a lot of stuff for an enterprise that goes in there. But a lot of times what we see happening on the service provider side is you go in with the mindset that, hey, I can reduce your rate cards and I can get your FTEs from, let's say, $20 an hour down to $15 an hour. Well, it helps, but realize there is a lot of overhead that gets produced. And if you don't manage that and set the right expectations around it, you might land yourself in a flat conversation. So the total cost of ownership from an enterprise's view is what you really need to think about. Can you really drive better efficiencies at that level?
Yeah. And that is why the last message here is, and since the audience here is analyst relations and you are engaging with your key stakeholders internally, and I'm pretty sure you are picking up signals internally on what they are discussing about, what they are having conversations on with their end clients, one of the things to realize is that the priority will be towards pragmatic digital investments. And what we mean by that is, like when I was speaking about the pre-committed initiatives, things which have already been scaled to an extent that they are showcasing results. So wherein we are talking about, say, data-driven decision-making, wherein we are talking about transformation in, say, for example, finance and accounting, what kind of processes were being used earlier versus now. Those are the initiatives wherein it's easy to showcase results and where you can message appropriately as regards what benefits that you can get in the interim from a time to value perspective will get prioritized over things which are really moonshot investments. So like tenets such as, hey, investments in metaverse, or say, for example, usage of blockchain for distributed ledgers, etc., which are great concepts to scale in a long-term perspective. But during 2023, you will see some of the latter part of what I mentioned getting less priority compared to some of the ones wherein you can actually showcase impact. And that is going to be an important aspect of what you should continue to assert within your enterprises to focus on. And obviously, there will be swim lanes in which you will operate on some of those moonshot investments. There will be clients who would be interested in that, but they will be overweight on some of these pragmatic investments that we are outlining here.
Yeah, I think the way I would put it is, see, we are entering into a Gen Z kind of a generation, right? And I'm not saying that our executives are Gen Z, but realize their kids are. And what that essentially means is a lot of the attention span, a lot of the need for gratification is starting to become more instantaneous. So to Abhishek's point, moonshot investments where the ROI is over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, those investments are likely to get more deprioritized, as opposed to saying that, hey, I can deliver value for your organization in the financial year. Doesn't mean that everything needs to pay for itself, but at least the ROI needs to start becoming more real, so that when a CIO, a CFO, a CEO goes to their board and presents those cases, they can say, hey, we're going to make $100 million investment, but guess what? A portion of that we're going to get back this year, and for the rest of it, here is what the roadmap looks like. So I don't think we're talking about years anymore. We need to have ROI discussions in more months and quarters.
Absolutely. And since we've been talking for the last 10 minutes on the themes themselves, I'm pretty sure a lot of folks in the audience are asking this question, so what for me? And Katrina, let's take us through that aspect of how these trends actually correlate with what AR teams can drive value on internally.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that setup in terms of giving us some thorough things to think about. Clearly, we're looking at all of these very deeply at Everest Group. But as I was thinking through, how do we bring these themes to be relevant to the role and the agenda of the analyst relations professional? Two things came to mind. Your areas of influence, your spheres of influence with your audiences, you really have kind of two stakeholders, right? You have your internal stakeholders, which are your decision makers, practitioners, planners who are trying to run the business. And you have your external market realm of influence. And so we've split up our comments along those two vectors. And I'm going to begin by talking about those internal stakeholders, and then we'll hand it off to Manu to talk about the market influence. But one thing that you'll see here is I've taken the individual themes and I've looked at how can AR be influential in relation to those themes, and who would be the impacted stakeholders, what organizational units inside your company would benefit from that help. Because this is all about planning, right? The goal of our session today is to give you some fodder to support the planning processes in your organizations that are either wrapping up or initiating here in January of the year. So one through line that you'll see through all my comments points back to the fact that analyst relations professionals have this unique position where they can bring this outside-in view to their organization. You're out there talking to different kinds of analysts, research firms, data sources, you're attending events, And in a very valuable way, you're bringing that outside in perspective to practitioners who are themselves interacting with the market, but sometimes might be caught in habits and patterns of how they think about their business. So you have that opportunity to be disruptive in that way. So let's take it one step down so it's a little bit more concrete. If we look at the topic of talent mismatch, as you heard both Abhishek and Manu talk about, the talent quandary is quite complex. And so knowing how to support the teams, such as your strategy or your product owners or your HR colleagues, or even the delivery teams with information that's useful on talent, you actually need to help them navigate to the specific data sources that can look at how locations impact the availability and cost of talent, how there's different types of data related to talent and who has what kind, which sources in the marketplace has what kind of information, and have your own map of where to go for talent of different types of talent information. And they're not going to have the ability to do that, but they may be looking to you. They may even be looking to an internal sort of market intelligence organization, but those market intelligence teams are often also one step removed from the discussions in the marketplace with analysts, for example. It's really the AR folks that tend to interact with analysts and thought leaders. The issue of pricing and rate cards, very important, but it's so important to have the right sources of information. And so they're going to look to you for that, and how to think about their options for benchmarking, how to think about what segments and what engagement models, and how the different sources of information in the market differ between a in-house delivery center's pricing framework versus a outsourcing relationship pricing framework. And so your proposal teams, your pricing teams, your sales teams, they all need the actual most relevant information to the deals that they're pursuing in the marketplace. Provider rebalancing. This is where having a very good base for competitive intelligence comes into play, and understanding how your models might in some ways be similar or different to your competitors. It has to do with the functionality that your platform offers versus another's, and how to think about where your opportunities lie as your clients are trying to rebalance their portfolios across technology and services. Being able to go down to the account level and having the intelligence to support that account-based analysis of how is this account thinking about its portfolio based on its business model versus another account that may appear similar on the surface, but doesn't necessarily behave the same when you look one level deeper. And that kind of information is going to be important to your product development colleagues, to the solutions colleagues, and certainly to the marketing teams who are out there telling the story of your firm compared to the competitors in the marketplace. And that whole conversation around pragmatic digital projects. This is where case studies come in really helpful, and understanding not only your case studies, but looking around and hearing about how others in the market are implementing these packages, these services, and are they thinking about it from the standpoint of just their vertical industry? Are they thinking about it from the standpoint of the functionality they're trying to create? And it is important to look at these case studies because, as we've heard, right sizing is going to be important as we move forward in the next foreseeable future. And so, which of these case studies is relevant for how you see behavior in the marketplace? There are some out there that are very grandiose, and there are others that are very targeted. And so, what do those look like, and how do you actually bring those to market? So I've had bringing those actual case examples back to organization, to the strategy team, to the delivery, digital delivery teams, to the solution teams. And so one of the things that you might be scratching your head about and asking is that, Yeah, but I'm responsible for the, I tend to see, okay, so let me take one step back. In my role of interacting with the analyst relations community on behalf of Everest Group, I talk to a lot of folks of different size companies, of different size enterprises, service providers, as well as technology providers. I've noticed that typically the way your teams are organized are either by vertical industry or by functional market, so digital versus solutions versus platforms and so forth, or some sort of matrix of the two. But I actually think there's also an opportunity for your teams to have individuals who are well-versed in the different elements of your go-to-market. So who's out there in your team that knows where to get good talent and knows the research firms that specialize or have the ability to provide talent-centric information? Who do I go to when I need that kind of information? Similarly for pricing, do you have somebody on your team that knows all of the sources of pricing information in the marketplace and knows when the request comes in from a different internal team, which one of those pricing information providers would be a good match? And so that's another dimension of how to think about driving value to your internal stakeholders that I don't see happening a lot today in the market, but could be a competitively interesting direction to go in. So let me leave it at that. I've done a lot of talking. We want to hear some things from your side. We have another poll that we'd like to ask you to participate in. So we've been talking about how the AR team can be helpful and influential to your internal stakeholders and in the planning process. So we're asking you that question of how often are you as AR practitioners brought into the planning meetings to tackle some of these things that we've been talking about? And boy, there's a lot of answers coming in very quickly. So I think this is actually a popular question. And I'm very curious to see how we do on that. Yeah, wow, we have good participation. It's very interesting. I've seen a lot of different models in the marketplace. Some AR teams seem to be mandated with a very external orientation or external mandate, how to get your visibility up in the marketplace. Some are more so asked to think about strategic topics. The way our poll is turning out is that, it seems like it's sort of a 50-50 kind of thing. Sometimes you're brought in, but not as often as you'd like. And as I was just commenting, it seems like some are never brought in and some are, actually taxed quite a bit and asked to come in more often than they have the capacity to come in, maybe, or maybe the resource to come in. So it seems like there's plenty of opportunity here for that. Sorry, Abhishek, go ahead.
No, what I was saying is that hopefully with some of the messages that we are offering here will allow the analyst relations teams to take those messages internally and figure out the alignment that they need with the stakeholders. And I think that's the objective with which we came into this discussion, and hopefully will help our partners accomplish that.
Yeah, it seems like AR teams have the appetite, and it's a matter of being able to share that that viewpoint with colleagues across the firm.
Sure.
Okay, very good. So with that, I'm going to ask Manu to take over the conversation related to the impact for how do we bring the themes to bear in what you do with your external market exposure. Manu?
Sure. Thanks, Katrina. So I think Katrina talked a lot about the internal stakeholders, the kind of pull channels that you can create. So now let's also look at the external part of it, right? So we've largely broken down into four key areas where the AR teams can actually create a lot of influence in how your organization goes to market. So we talked about some of the key themes that are there that we are seeing in the industry. I think it's also important for everyone to understand what are the key priorities and viewpoints that your own organization has for 2023. So yeah, we talked about recession, but what is the take on recession that your respective organizations have? What are the key strategic topics on which the firm is doubling down? And then making sure that the AR teams are getting that messages out to the external market, whether it's the analysts, whether it's possibly clients who are using channels like case studies and website and other kind of marketing material, or it's any kind of thought leadership that you put out. So it's making sure that your firm's strategic priorities and viewpoints are getting communicated through all of those channels to the right set of stakeholders, be it analysts, be it clients, be it somebody else. So that's part one. The second is, and this is the place where we've often seen conversations kind of taking two directions, right? A lot of the executives, depending on who you are kind of speaking with, sometimes they will take a very inward-looking view, and depending on who you are talking to in the industry, whether it's a client or an analyst, sometimes you need to diversify that. So a common pitfall we see people falling into is that, okay, hey, am I talking about my organization alone, versus am I trying to convey the message in terms of what that means for the external market? So you need to think about, okay, what are the priorities that are going out in the industry, right? What do the clients want to hear about? What do the analysts want to hear about? And then tailor your messages to them, as opposed to saying, hey, no, this year we think that this is going to be a priority and I'm just going to talk about this one. So we talked about issues around talent supply models. We talked about pricing and rate card. So these are themes that the industry wants to hear about, right? Not just us as analysts, but our clients as well. They want to hear your organization's POV, and hence the executives need to be kind of coached a little bit. That you need to select the right executives to put in front of clients and analysts so that they can talk to those themes and make sure that the messages kind of get out in the right manner. So that becomes a very important job for the analyst relation community to make sure that, hey, we are not missing out on some of these key messages, because in a year like this, it's not just going to be your same playbook that you've been executing for the last 3 or 4 years. There are new themes that are emerging, and we need to talk to those as well. And then the efficiency part of it. So in the previous poll, some teams did say that, hey, bandwidth is a challenge. So how can you actually use the tools that are available to you, be it from an analyst organization like us, like the client portal that we have exposed to for all of you and for all of your business partners, but also for other organizations? What are those tools and technologies that are available that can make your life easier? Whether it's in terms of data collection, getting the responses out, making sure that you're staying on top of the various things that are happening in an industry, because I'm sure as your professionals, you would agree that there's way too many things that happen, and sometimes it's not easy to stay on top of everything. So these tools can actually be a huge boon towards managing your own work effectively and taking the right decision in terms of where do you see the right investment of your time, your team's time, your client references, and all of that stuff. And then the last one, and I think both Abhishek and Katrina touched about this a little bit, is how do you actually drive maximum value in terms of the various channels that you have, right? So how can I make sure that, okay, I actually have good engagement with the industry? So inquiries, briefings, data cards, there's so many things that are happening right now, right? This webinar right there, and there's hundreds of such webinars that happen across the year. So how do you stay on top of these things and make sure that you have the right opportunities to engage your business, to use these channels, and then make sure that you are having the right influence and engagement on the analysts and your clients? So that becomes also an important part, because a lot of the times you get this question that, am I really making the optimal use of my relationships in the industry? So
Yeah,
staying on top of these things is not an easy job, but yeah, it's that's what we're signing up for.
yeah. Actually,
Thank you,
I
Katrina.
should mention real quick, as I work with different firms, I do notice the need to do a bit of an audit internally of, are we using the things that we've invested in? Because there's tools there that could help you if you're a small player, if you have a small team, you may have tools that can create leverage for you that you're not utilizing. And so to get that value out of your investment, make sure you know what components are in your membership and that you're using them to their maximum, because that'll not only give you resources to make yourself compelling, but also help you create leverage, because those tools are there. And believe me, research teams and analysts, they want you to engage and they want you to use what you've invested in.
Absolutely.
So we actually have something to offer you in that whole objective. Abhishek will tell us about that.
No, absolutely. We offered a lot of ideas to you today, but as the saying goes, the proof of the pudding is in eating it. So here is where we offer you a complimentary 30-minute session with any of our analyst relation folks with align to some of the themes that we covered today. So there's 5 themes for 2023 that we covered. So you can pick one topic and we'll offer you a 30-minute conversation on how you want to take that internally. Some of those could be some things that you are picking up as signals internally already. That would be a good alignment. Or if you look at the illustration on the right-hand side, 2023 business planning has either kicked off or getting kicked off for a lot of folks on your side. If you see any of these topics which are mentioned in the hexagon, the colored hexagons around the 2023 business planning box, if those are topics or questions that are coming up to you, reach out to us. We'll be happy to offer you some advice around how to take those up and address those questions, whether they relate to industry-specific opportunities, partnership, competition, so on and so forth. And I think there would be a link in the chat window for you to be able to select that CTA.
Yeah, very true. It will be, the link is there, and we'll also be sharing some post-call communication, and you'll see it there as well. We have a few minutes left for our Q&A, and one of the questions I'd like to begin with is related to, I've gotten different versions of this both before and during our webinar about what are the tools we're talking about, how do we bring new value to our organizations. And many times there are opportunities for you to utilize inquiries, for you to utilize data cuts, for you to utilize attendance in workshops and webinars that would allow not only you as a AR person to benefit from the interaction with the research firm, but your practitioners, who I know you're shaking your head and saying they're too busy, but somebody on their team or themselves would benefit from some kind of insight that they will collect in utilizing these resources. So for you to be able to put that menu in front of them and having the knowledge about what is in your membership, and then taking it and saying, hey, I've heard you're struggling with trying to figure out what XYZ competitor is doing. Would you like to have, or what the market is doing from a competitive standpoint? Would you like to have a conversation with an analyst? We have access to the partners at Everest Group. It's part of your membership. You've paid for it. It's worth the time. As you can see, folks are very knowledgeable and are interested in sharing their information and knowledge with you. So we don't see enough of that happening, and it's an opportunity that you've probably encountered and maybe not fully taken advantage of. Another question that I want to field comes from the standpoint of, let's see here. We had a question related to, okay, here we go. What are the pain points this time on the cloud and automation track for AR teams? So this is a bit more, Abhishek, maybe in your realm of things, but I wanted to answer because we're getting some questions about particular markets, and I wanted to just give them a little taste of.
We're at the top of the hour. I think we'll take this question offline, and almost all of the questions that have come in, we'll try and respond to it.
Yeah,
offline.
you're right. The time's.
But the one message that I'll leave you with is, as I noticed in the quiz itself, most people ended up responding that, hey, we're not getting as much attention from the key stakeholders. One thing to use would be some of the messages that you keep hearing from analyst houses, whether it's Everest Group or any of our peers. Use those as provocations internally to get their attention, because these are market insights which impact them. So be proactive in reaching out to them, and so as they can make you partners in their thought process. And I think that's the role of analyst relations, and some of the best analyst relations folks that we have worked with typically end up being very proactive and become partners in the thought process of their key stakeholders.
I've encountered analyst relations folks who know our research portfolio sometimes better than I do, or let me know when a new study has come out. So there's a range of strategies and models out there. We wish you all a successful quarter, a successful year. Thank you for joining us, and hope to continue the conversation offline. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.